looks like we're on. Welcome, everybody, to uh, a webinar that's going to be looking at emerging protocols, specifically for AI agents that transact on behalf of consumers and other buyers. This is the race to standardize agentic commerce. And it's being convened by the Loyal Agents Initiative, which is a collaboration of Stanford, HAI, Digital Economy Lab, with the law school's CodeX research group and Consumer Reports Innovation Lab. Let me just set the stage a little bit, and then I'll introduce our speakers. This is about a major shift that's emerging right now. We're moving from a click to buy to a delegate to buy paradigm. So AI agents aren't just basically recommending products at this point in a chat session. They're completing transactions on your behalf. So ChatGPT, for example, users of that chatbot can now buy from Etsy directly as part of a conversation. And this is happening now. It's not in the future anymore. This isn't science fiction. It's literally gaining adoption in the marketplace now. And so it's not too early to start to reckon with how will this be organized and why. In terms of the future, while it's happening now, it's projected this isn't going to be a niche. McKinsey, among others, are projecting huge impacts on the economy, with total economic impact predictions ranging from $1 to $5 trillion globally by 2030. So 2030 is around the corner. That's within the planning horizons of organizations that I work with. In the past 90 days alone, we've seen a protocol race emerge, which is what we're going to focus on right now. In September, a month and a half ago, OpenAI and Stripe launched ACP. That's the Agentic Commerce Protocol that we'll hear more about. Also in September, Google launched AP2, the Agent Payment Protocol. I mentioned that for reference. That's part of A2A, Agent to Agent Protocol. Just last month, Visa launched the Trusted Agent Protocol, TAP. And there are crypto native approaches, including from Skyfire, who's also with us, that focus more on identity and autonomy. We'll hear more about those as well. So there's 1,000 flowers blooming right now with agent protocols. There's others as well that I haven't mentioned. But here's the critical question: is in these protocols, what are the roles and relationships of the parties, and who does the agent really work for? What is the role and the reasonable expectations of the consumer? And how do these payment rails and new protocols basically treat the consumer and their expectations? So one of the three pillars is identity and authorization. Did you really approve this purchase? Duty of loyalty. Is the agent working for you in your best interests? And reliability and measurement, or evals. Like how do we measure what's happening and ensure that the agent's adhering to and correctly conducting transactions in accordance to the expectations. So to dig into all this and to unpack some of these protocols, we've got a great lineup. We've assembled some senior representatives from the actual architects of three of these major protocols and a top consumer advocate voice in the AI agent space. And you're going to hear different approaches to some of the same fundamental challenges of trust, identity, and control in agentic commerce. So let's get right into it now. And to start off, I'd like to introduce, and actually help me with your last name. I've never said it out loud, but Kelsey.
Kelsey Velemirovich.
Oh, thank you, Velemirovich. And Kelsey's from Stripe. And as I mentioned a moment ago, Stripe and OpenAI recently launched the Agentic Commerce Protocol, ACP, and it's an open standard that gives agents and businesses a shared language. And so with a single integration, merchants can now sell through AI agents while keeping full control over what is sold and like their brand and brand voice and how fulfillment happens. And again, this just happens as part of a liquid conversation for the consumers. And you can do this now. I've done it and with ChatGPT. So Kelsey, Stripe is obviously solving the transaction problem in a very important way. And this new payment primitive for AI-led commerce, the shared payment token, is what I'm thinking about. AI platforms can use these tokens to securely package a customer's payment credentials, which get passed to the merchant. And I want to ask you to walk us through ACP and the shared payment token, and how do these address the unique problems of agentic commerce that I laid out at the start of the show.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. Quick disclaimer that this view and the views expressed are mine alone and not those of Stripe, but I am one of the product counsels who have worked on launching our agentic commerce products here at Stripe, including ACP and shared payment token. And I'll start with kind of the two problems that Stripe was looking to solve with our agentic offering. The first is the need to make checkouts and inventory legible to AI agents. So sellers need to be able to expose their product catalogs, pricing, sort of their overall checkout in a way that agents can understand and do so efficiently, sort of a one-stop shop to integrate with multiple different agents as needed. As a result, ACP was co-developed with OpenAI as a standard protocol. It's actually open sourced under the Apache 2.0 license, and it gives agents and sellers this shared language so that the checkouts really can be representative of how a seller wants their checkout to appear when a customer interacts with them, even if through an AI agent. So, given that one-to-many integration model, merchants, sellers can now sell through AI agents while still keeping that control that's so important to them. To your point, brand loyalty, the payment methods that they accept, how the customer looks and feels about their brand, even though they're accessing it through a new medium. The second problem that Stripe was looking to solve is managing risk in these AI-led or AI agent-led transactions. For customers, they want to know that their payment credential is going to be secure. Agents, on the other hand, need to be able to transact while not taking on the risks of being merchant of record. The sellers still want to own that merchant of record liability. So, how do we develop a solution together with the card networks that will enable that to happen? And that's where shared payment token comes in. So, it allows sellers to sort of see the payment credentials in a way that they need to and process transactions against them, but without exposing the raw pan or the true underlying nature of those credentials. And it allows, as a result, for those customers to feel like the agentic commerce ecosystem is treating their transactions more securely. And then on that shared payment token, Stripe enables our own products, such as Radar, to score in real time those payment transactions. So I'll pause there, but that's my quick overview.
Um, Amazing, and so profound in terms of just the if I can just say the bold spirit of engaging with OpenAI to just jolly well create a protocol to cause this to happen. So kudos for taking one bite of this apple, and you know and it does raise questions. The first question on my mind is how does the shared payment token help protect consumers?
hmm Great question. I would say there's two aspects to it. One is when I talked about kind of securely packaging the payment credential to make sure that the underlying raw PAN is not being exposed to the seller, it is number one. So whether through network agentic tokens or the shared payment token, like how are we thinking about ensuring the ability to process a transaction by the seller so they maintain that merchant of record status while still keeping secure the underlying credential? And then the second is when I mentioned Stripe Radar, I should also note shared payment token is just one primitive that can be used with ACP. So it is the Stripe version of what this token looks like and how we think it should operate. But others could develop their own ACP compliant versions of this. And for ours, we utilize scores coming in from Stripe Radar, a product that's been live for a number of years, so that we, Stripe, are able to see in real time the level of risk and kind of help with fraud protection in an agentic ecosystem. So it's that twofold, making sure the payment credential is secure, and then two, doing that scoring in real time of the transaction level risk.
So good. And being able to, identify and package and communicate fraud signals is such a core part of of all these different niches, all these different kind of milestones on the journey and on payment rails. And speaking of fraud, that brings to mind liability. So let me ask you one other follow-up question in terms of accountability. I'll put it more broadly. So we've got a dazzling array of players with some of these payment transactions, with the user, the agent, maybe the agent provider, maybe that could be decoupled from the model provider, and then there's an agent provider that uses a model. And of course, the merchant, and then, depending on what the payment looks like, perhaps there's a card issuer and an acquiring bank, a transaction processor, you name it. So things get confounded a little bit, I think, when we disintermediate the buyer and encapsulate their judgments and their aspects of their identity for real into this non-deterministic synthetically intelligent entity, this agent. So how does that confound questions? Or let me put it another way. How do we understand and how do we get predictable legal results when something goes wrong and the buying decision was that of this synthetic character, arguably a new type of entity?
Yes, I love this question so much because I think this, Jalpesh, I hope you agree with me saying this, but I think this has been where a lot of the novel questions about agentic commerce has come up and come into play because we're not dealing in a world where consumer, merchant, and those, yeah, there's a payment processor or a facilitator in between them, but they are the two parties to the transaction. Instead, you have an agent, you have the initiation of the transaction happening on that end, and then you have the merchant of record on the other end. And how do we think about the split of responsibilities even under the network rules that have defined merchant of record a certain way, and now we're kind of splitting responsibilities a bit. And I think there's a couple ways to think about it. One is going back to what do sellers want? And sellers want to maintain that merchant of record status. They want to control their products and services, order fulfillment, customer happiness. They want to be able to easily email a receipt saying, hey, you purchased this, here's your tracking number. The network, sort of the ecosystem players, card network, Stripe, other PSPs, we want to ensure the ecosystem remains secure. So that's in our best interest. And then you have these agents who want to have a traceable, trackable way of saying, yes, that was consent. That was a customer saying, I want to buy that according to these parameters. And so whether it's through agentic tokens, shared payment token, I think that becomes this ability to be a source of truth for what was the mandate, what was the consent, and how do we then pass it to the parties who need to see that that consent was obtained. So I'll pause there in case there are follow-up questions. Also, Jalpesh, I know we're sort of going in line, but sort of I think it'd be a fun time for you to jump in if
I think so. Maybe I'll jump in a little bit, Dazza, if you don't mind.
It's actually a perfect segue, and you are the next speaker. And I'll follow up with more intro and framing later, but let's not break the flow. Please jump in.
Yeah. So I think I'll step back to your question a little bit. You basically said there are a lot of parties involved between consumer shopping and a merchant website. So if I were to step back a little bit, for the longest time in e-commerce, the transaction happened where a consumer goes to a merchant website and consumer still involved in the transaction. Merchant human beings are not involved, but merchant software is involved in the transaction. Consumer can go and review everything. They buy things, they discover things. Like obviously discovery is more than the merchant website, but their discovery leads to a merchant website. They discover things on a merchant website. They get to a checkout page. They see everything before they select their payment instrument. Now that whole journey is inverted with many entities sitting between a consumer and a merchant in an agentic flow. I think you were asking that question, Dazza. So you're talking to a agent. An agent is probably using some third-party, potentially their first-party custom models. They're provided by somebody else for discovery. There's some provided for reviews. They're provided for browsing the web or potentially using ACP or some other AP2 protocols to reach the merchant to complete the transaction. But as they're doing it, there's so many players involved who can obfuscate information they saw from one model or one discovery tool to ACP tool to before the consumer sees what is being bought on their behalf. So there is this risk of misrepresentation. And I think I'm stepping back to your previous question also to an extent. There's a risk of misrepresentation of what a consumer intended to buy what an agent intended to buy, but they're actually presenting something wrong, and merchant does not know that. So merchants are really worried about that, by the way. If you ask any merchant, they're worried about when they receive the order, they don't know if the consumer was valid. Like, it's the same thing, like from a merchant as well. Like, merchant doesn't know if a consumer is valid, because that could be many entities between who obfuscated and sent the stolen credential, or didn't do the right validation on the payment credential and send that over. So that's that problem. And obviously Stripe solving with risk score, but there is still assurance issue across the board, and that happens in e-commerce as well. So just compounded or confounded, I guess, with everything that's happening right now. So both merchants and consumers have trust issues that have now gotten worse than e-commerce in the Asian e-commerce.
Indeed. Perfect segue. So let me introduce you. Actually, first, I think I forgot to introduce myself. Is that true? I
That is
did.
true.
So, by the way, the person speaking right now is I am Dazza Greenwood. Hello. I'm honored to host this webinar, and I am while the webinar, as I mentioned, is being convened by Stanford and Consumer Reports. I reckon myself part of both organizations, having worked with Consumer Reports for years on the data rights protocol and other great initiatives, and I've just loved the team. And also, I'm at Stanford in CodeX in the law school, computational law group, and with the digital economy lab, which is the part of Stanford that is in HAI and co-convening the Loyal Agents Initiative that this webinar is part of. Okay, so that's all the affiliations. And my background is law and technology, and mostly I do consulting through civics.com, but I'm here in my research capacity, which is all about agents and looking at how they can operate effectively across the economy and society. Now, one great way to operate effectively is to make sure things don't go terribly wrong, which brings us to Jalpesh, or back to you, Jalpesh, of Visa, VP of Growth and Products. And well, Stripe, who we just heard more about, their protocol is more focused on the checkout transaction kind of part of the life cycle. I feel like Visa is taking a different approach, and you're looking at another aspect of what you were just talking about with intent and the things that can go off the rails. And specifically with your protocol, I feel like you're looking at agent identity and merchant acceptance. So like, how do we know that this um, code, this synthetic entity, isn't, scraping our site like a bot, or worse yet, hasn't been, taken over maliciously as part. It's not, part of some like attack. And so enter the Visa Trusted Agent Protocol, or TAP, that I mentioned earlier, that gives agents a kind of cryptographic passport, so merchants can distinguish the legitimate agents that are verifiably operating on behalf of a consumer that they're trying to sell to, from these other bothersome scrapers and malicious, attack bots and all those other bad things. So Visa is in a great position to do this. I was just talking about how admirable your network really is in the payment space before the show started. 4.8 billion payment credentials, 150 million merchants, across the entire world. And your fraud detection blocked $40 billion in otherwise what would have been fraud last year. So my question is, with this position in the market and this expertise, how does your protocol use cryptographic signatures to verify the agents and to ensure that this agent is operating legitimately on behalf of like that consumer? And I guess for fun and extra credit, is this the end of CAPTCHAs now that we'll have our own front door for agents?
Yeah, maybe I'll address a fun question first. Probably the answer is no. It's a long time coming, but yes, that should be the approach. Consumers have access to their websites, and agents have access to the websites. Consumers are predictably identified as consumers, and then there is no chance of having a CAPTCHA. But that's a very philosophical future debate there, But going back to the meat of the question, if you think about what Visa's done, we've done two things so far in this year. And traditionally, if you look at what Visa does, we create software, we create rules on how that software can be used by every participant in the ecosystem. Traditionally, four parties, acquirers, issuers, and then goes to merchants and cardholders. Now there is a new party being introduced called agents. So the first thing we did is we built the software, we enabled the software for agents to go and shop on behalf of consumers. So that software has four key capabilities. Some of them are existing capabilities that are augmented for agents. One is the payment credentials have to be tokenized. We don't want consumers' underlying PAN or card number information flowing from an agent environment to a merchant, because that information can then be stolen across many intermediary parties that we just talked about. Agent is a third-party software using models. Models are like several models before it gets passed to the merchant through the internet. So we don't want consumers' actual payment credential to ever flow on that rail. So that's number one. Number two, what we said is these payment credentials have to be verified by the bank before they can be used. Again, trust is most important piece. And how do you go and drive trust? If Jane Doe went to ChatGPT and added their credential, and if Jane Doe's credential were validated by their underlying bank in saying, yes, this credential actually belongs to Jane Doe, that instills higher level of trust to begin with. And that authentication, that identity and verification by the bank already provides higher assurance when that tokenized credential reaches the merchant, that this is not a stolen credential that reached them.
And just to make absolutely sure I'm tracking, you're in the Visa and I think every credit card space, you've got the issuing bank, the card issuing bank, and then the acquiring bank for the parallel for the merchant. You're talking about the card issuing bank now that has the direct relationship with the consumer, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And the fact that consumer has direct relationship with the card issuing bank, that consumer credential, when that gets added to an agent, card issuing bank should be able to go and verify that this is a valid card holder. So agent is now receiving a token from the network on behalf of a card issuing bank. So that token is now assured to be belonging to this consumer. And as now that delegation has happened between the consumer to an agent, and now agent is more confident in shopping at a merchant location. Merchant is more confident in accepting that token because it came with that token issuer's verification that this belonged to a right consumer. So that is number one challenge that happened in e-commerce, because e-commerce, when you key enter a card, that key entered card has no assurance that it actually belongs to the consumer. So we build a lot of heuristics and risk-based rules, but those rules fail many a times, and that's why we have fraud. That's why we have to prevent fraud with $40 billion of work that we've done last year in terms of preventing fraud. So I think the idea is to avoid fraud to begin with, and that is very small price of friction that a consumer has to pay the first time in an agentic environment. So that's the second capability in the software. The third capability that we introduced was, and I think Kelsey talked about consent, and you talked about consent as well, Dazza. The idea is, how do you go and ensure that when an agent goes and buys something on your behalf, that agent has the authority to buy that specific item or buy for that specific purpose? I could go and say, buy me running shoes, or I could also go and say, get me something for my ankle pain. And maybe after all of this conversation, agent said, hey, are you okay with me buying running shoes? Because that might solve your problem. They're like, yeah, sure, go buy me running shoes. So, but effectively, whatever the conversation be, the final confirmation that agent is going to buy a specific item for you or do a specific transaction on your behalf using your Visa card, that transaction consent is limited by certain parameters. Like, for example, don't do this commerce action as long as you could do this commerce action as long as it's within $150. And then agent has authority to do that action for that amount within that time range. So that's a consent piece that we're collecting, which is similar to what AP2 and ACP talks about as mandates and delegation. So we also talk about something similar. So that's that. We call that as payment instruction in our vocabulary anyway. And then the final step is agent taking an autonomous action. Not much of that is happening yet, but will happen at some point in the future. So we built the capability and the tooling so agents can build the innovative experiences without having to come back to network every single time. So when agents take that autonomous action, that action needs to be logged with the network so network can validate if it actually matches the consumer intent or the payment instruction that we just logged. And as long as it matches, then agent receives the payment credential for that specific transaction, for that specific agent action, and they can transact at a merchant location. So I'll pause there. But so far, what we've built is a software that enables an agent to shop independently on behalf of a cardholder.
Fascinating. I think you came off, Ben. So thank you for that overlay. It's, I've actually read the specification, and I'm much clearer on it right now than I was when I was maybe too deep in the weeds, and particularly the instructions part of the way that you reckon how to articulate and kind of encapsulate and carry forward the original intent of the consumer. I think you kind of reference this, but in AP2, they call it an intent mandate, and they've got a particular JSON schema, and there's other variations of that. I think it's really it's one of the challenges of the day now to do this, and it's. I just hasten to add, it's not like we were ever geniuses at capturing consumer intent to start with, even when they were at the keyboard. Like, there's still mistakes that enter in with the deterministic systems, and those are probably going to be exploded now with this non-deterministic intermediation. I guess my question is, could you just speak a little more about how do you try to capture the original intent, and then once it's been transformed based on research and agentic processes, make sure that that what happens at the purchase decision adheres to what the consumer wanted, and what's the balance between consent fatigue that could really explode now with the agents going back for clarifications and mini approvals versus getting what we want from agents, which is more autonomy.
Yeah. So I'll state and I'll also talk about very simple UX language, and I think we can go into the next level of in terms of what goes into the intent a little bit. So there are two types of scenarios. One where consumers in the loop, human in the loop, humans basically saying, go find me certain item. Let's say I'll stick with the shoes. Go find me this shoe that fits my specification, my color, size, what have you, as long as it's under $150. Agents can come find a shoe and present it to me and saying, hey, these are the three options. Some is more than 150, some is less than 150, but what do you want? And I'm like, okay, you know what? It's 165. Go buy this shoe, right? So at that point, there is a consent. It's actually happening in e-commerce today, right? All the time. We don't call it consent. We call it confirmation screen. We call it review screen. We call it multiple other things. All we're saying is now that a credential was verified in an agentic space, all the consumer has to do is some level of biometric verification that says that you are present before you're giving agent the authority to buy on your behalf. Right? So that's really what we're trying to get to. So that's the consent. So we're not trying to go and add more friction into that flow. Then let's talk about another use case where humans not in the loop, where you're no longer asking an agent to go and say, go find me thing and I'll choose what I want. Because the best part of the agent is you provide them more autonomy, to your point. Maybe not for my shoe, maybe not for throwing a birthday party for my kid, but maybe for certain things that I don't have that much of emotional sort of burden on. Like I might go and say, you know what, just buy me these things, like on an automated basis. Maybe I'm fixing pesto pasta tonight. Like just go buy me ingredients for pesto pasta. How can you get that wrong? Like it's like $20, and if that doesn't show up, I'll cook something else at home. That's fine. And let's say I did that and I asked the agent to go and fix me pesto pasta ingredients, and it'll find a bunch of things and get it from Whole Foods or Safeway and then place an order. As long as it's within that same constraint, my consent now to an agent is not what individual ingredients are or not what merchant is. It's just buy me the pesto pasta ingredients up to $100, or like, I don't know, $100 is too much, but maybe $25, $50, I don't know. Clearly, I don't go and do the groceries at home. But if for $50, let's say. So, and at that point, the agent has my consent to spend $50 in groceries, but they just can't buy shoes for me for $25 with that $50. They can only buy groceries. So the idea is like we have the consent that is logged, and that consent can be used for avoiding disputes to begin with, because we can validate it up front. We can build better risk rules around it in the processing and the network processing. Like we talked about, we avoid a lot of fraud today. And at the end of the transaction and the post-purchase, we can use the same information to automate dispute claim processing. If I forgot that I'd asked my agent to go and do this for me, and I claim that, hey, I did not authorize this agent to do it for me, there is automated automation that we could do as a network eventually that basically shows, no, this is what you had done. Like this was your consent, and you had signed the consent with an agent. So we can improve the experiences during the purchase, before the purchase, and after the purchase, when there are exceptions or disputes or memory lapses in my case.
Got it. Fascinating. I'm just, it's been a while since I practiced law, but I can just imagine the exotic wrinkles that will emerge over time over, how intent was extrapolated under the circumstances. And part of how we can guess this is because we already have thousands of years of experience with human agents that are literally human level intelligence that come up with really interesting ways to interpret what the person they're working for said, they meant by $50 worth of groceries for this kind of meal, et cetera, et cetera. But, we may be in a better position now that things are encapsulated within a coded environment so that we can get things, trace them through, and maybe have even more agents to make the right calls and adhere them to our interests. So thank you for telling us how you too are boldly going forward into the future, and putting out a protocol to start to codify, how we're going to make this transition to agent-based purchases, like with our values and with safety and security intact. We have had a theme here about identity and the identity of the agent, and we're now going to really lean into that with our next speaker, Craig DeWitt of Skyfire, who previously launched RippleNet, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. It's scaled to over 100 billion in crypto transactions, and now with Skyfire, he's taking a fundamentally interesting approach, I'm going to call it, which is, what if agents had their own wallets and economic identity? So not like so much an extension of like, this is the card holder, but it's like its own endpoint economically. That's interesting for the agent economy. And so while other protocols are adapting existing payment rails, I think Skyfire is also boldly going agent native with infrastructure from the ground up. And I want to look at KYA Pay, or Know Your Agent, like know your customer, know your agent is the new challenge payment protocol. And it gives agents funded wallets. It enables agent to agent payments. It can handle microtransactions. And Craig, I was hoping you could tell us, why does agent commerce need its own payment rails as opposed to, kind of building on and extending the existing ones, which we've been hearing about, and how do consumers maintain control when their agents have, this much financial autonomy? Like we were just freaking out over a little autonomy. What happens when it's got a lot of autonomy?
Thanks, Dazza. So it really depends on the use case from what we're seeing. So there is a future of agents interacting with other agents. There's a future of agents interacting with individual tools, all to complete tasks on behalf of a user. What we see today is agents interacting with websites and accessing content, which is and paying for that, because an ads model doesn't work very well because agents don't really have eyeballs to be able to surface. And that is a $700 billion question, right? And so in those kind of use cases, we see an opportunity for a new payment rail, really around micropayments. A lot of these are not well suited with today's traditional rails. primarily because the geographic nature of where agents live and the low cost that these things are transacting at. Very difficult to use a card payment for a 0.5 cent transaction from an agent based in Hong Kong to an agent based in Lithuania. And so those are kind of the fundamental issues that we see there. But I will say, really, where we've been pulled as a company is in traditional sense, what we see today are agents primarily going out and buying things. The agent to agent identity is something that we see on the horizon. But like the rest of the conversation today, like the primary piece that we see today are agents going to e-commerce sites and purchasing. And there, what's necessary is we haven't seen a lot of access to MCP servers yet. We really see agents traversing the web. And what that requires is the agents have to get past a bot manager to access, say, homedepot.com. And then on homedepot.com, when they plug in those credit card details that we're talking about earlier, they need to circumvent a forder or a riskified or a sardine. In all those cases, regardless of agent to agent or regardless of agent to website, identity is a core aspect. And there are layers to this. And the layers that we see start with the platform, they start with the individual agent. And right now, what we see from the merchants that we work with, they really care about the principal, that is the user or the business that is represented by that agent. And those are all required in order for the agents to get access in the first place.
Principal PAL, which is like the boss that bosses the agent, or like the boss that bosses an employee around, or the person that hired an agent to conduct a task, right?
Exactly right. Right. And so those are all important parts of the payload, because if you are a merchant or a content provider or anyone with a website, you are very worried about being disintermediated from the end customer. You do not want to become dumb pipes. And so in that case, in order to maintain a direct relationship with your customer, you need to know who that agent is working on behalf of. And in many cases, with the bot blockers that we have partnerships with, that is a requirement for the agent to be able to access the site. Otherwise, it's a big 403 error in your face that says your kind not welcome here.
So provocative. And so I guess I didn't characterize your efforts very well because you're not fully in this future of like agent to agent, fully autonomous. It sounds like you really are bridging also to more customary kind of e-commerce scenarios as well. And let me ask you this, like how with KYA pay, do you like verify that the agent is trustworthy? I guess I'd put it that way. So like, how do you know that it isn't right to give a 404 error? Like how does the platform or the merchant or the payee distinguish using your protocol and how can I guess how reliable, like to what extent can they rely to their detriment on the signals that you're giving them?
Yeah. I think the tricky part here is that there is no objective good versus bad in this case. Really, what it's about is delivering verified information on all the parties involved. And so, what Skyfire does is Skyfire onboards platforms. This could be, as an example, like a large bank that's offering a shopping experience within their app, or even someone like a Consumer Reports. And we're able to verify that whenever an agent within that application is sending a token, that is in fact an agent on behalf of that principal. The other piece that we do is because we're providing a wallet service and we've implemented a lot of the technologies that Jalpesh was talking about, of allowing cards to be stored, of onboarding users, we have a unique insight to the KYC of those individuals. And it's that package that can be delivered along with an existing HTTPS web request that is then consumed by the bot manager to say, okay, I'm going to allow in a user with a Visa card with a valid email address into homedepot.com so that they can shop.
Got it. Fascinating. So this to me sounds like if we call the payee like the relying party, they're relying on the what's in the payload. You're giving them a lot more very relevant information so that they can make their own risk determination and decide, how much do I want to rely upon this? And last question. So what happens when the agent that has a funded wallet makes a mistake? So there's been like something has gone a bit haywire. It happens. Could you just sort of play that scenario out?
Yeah. So the flow that we see today is an agent on behalf of a user is crawling the web, right? So it goes to a merchant site. It expresses its identity along with the HTTP request and then gets into the website. KYA tokens for access is not a carte blanche, do whatever you want. They're still under scrutiny from the protection of the website. And so if the agent starts hitting rate limits, if the agent starts doing nefarious activity, it's still governed by the same protections that exist today to prevent them from actually doing harm to the website. But if it gets past that point, once it creates a cart, and for the folks listening, like the agents today that we see, they're literally shopping the same way that you and I do. They're creating a web browser, they're going to the website, it looks like, a cursor moving around, they're creating a cart. Now it comes down to the checkout UI. When the agent has to plug something into the checkout UI, today they're calling Skyfire. Skyfire's interfacing with Visa to be able to return that tokenized card so that they can directly plug it into that checkout UI. If it goes haywire, what Jalpesh was talking about is something that we're big fans of, and that is going out and getting a user mandate. So before I'm allowed to get a card, I need to get a permission from the user from a binded device, usually with a passkey or a biometric, that they have approved this transaction for this merchant, for this amount, for this product. When the user says that, just kind of like Apple Pay, it's very difficult for the agent to go haywire on that because it's been specifically approved to make that payment. And the last thing I'll add, Dazza, is that the last piece is the agent has to plug in the credit card just like we do into that checkout UI. That's another piece where KYA identity comes into play because there is 30 years of protection on that checkout UI, right? And when you see someone programmatically put in a credit card, usually from a different IP address, that's a massive sign for fraud. So that's the other interface where the agent is delivering this verified identity that says, hey, I am an agent. You are going to see agent activity. Here's who I'm representing. And guess what? It happens to match this card. That's how you get straight through processing.
Love it. Yeah, I love the answers to dispute resolution where like we've engineered this to avoid the dispute to start with. To me, that's like gold standard dispute resolutions. We never had one. Thank you. And speaking of a better tomorrow, now here comes basically my favorite consumer advocate in the whole wide world. Pardon me for gushing, but Ginny Fahs, who's director of product and R&D at Consumer Reports and who leads some of their more, I'd say, technology forward efforts. We'd worked together, I'm proud to say, on the data rights protocol. And now Ginny is really leaning into how AI agents can be used for the benefit of consumers specifically. CR has been testing products for 90 years, and now you're testing agent behavior. And I'm thinking specifically of Ask CR, your most recent big splash product launch, which is a conversational AI used by hundreds of thousands of CR members, if I understand correctly. I'll let you characterize it, but I'd love it if you could open your remarks just by explaining what Ask CR does. I don't want to do it injustice, but to me, it seems like a magical butler that opens up all of the intelligence of Consumer Reports so that it can help guide me so I can take advantage of that when I'm making my purchase decisions. Really good. And you're not stopping with recommendations. You're also exploring the actual purchase itself. So we've heard from the protocol builders. Now, can you, Ginny, bring the consumer perspective? What do you think is missing, if anything, at this point from these protocols? And how do we measure whether an agent is acting in our best interest? So let's say we know it's the agent. Let's just take as given everything that's been said. We understand um, who the consumer was. We understand that this is the agent of that consumer. Everything's been kind of cryptographically verified. Um, how do we ensure that the agent is being loyal to the best interests of the consumer and not maybe subtly its judgments about which product to select isn't being subtly or maybe not so subtly skewed toward the interests of, I don't know, advertisers or channel partners, or for that matter, just the training data has distortions in it because maybe like Walmart is overrepresented. So there's lots of ways in which the consumer's interest may not be put before other parties' interests. Maybe they're not all solvable, but I know that that's the center of a lot of your activity and why it is you joined with Stanford on the Loyal Agents project. And can you talk to us a little bit about, how do we trust these agents with our money and with our intent?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dazza. And also, I've just already learned so much on this webinar. So I'm really grateful to Kelsey, Jalpesh, and Craig. There are so many wonderful points made. I love, Jalpesh, your point about the obfuscation when not only an agent is intermediating the consumer and the purchase they want to make, but also all of the non-deterministic systems that are part of that intermediation. It's leading to a vastly more complex marketplace in a number of ways. One is just information quality. Yeah, already the information environment online is written with advertising, and it's hard to know the source of information or what information to trust. Consumer Reports, since our founding in the mid 1930s, has been really interested in informed choices and how to provide objective information so that consumers can make the best choice for them based on their unique circumstances. And of course, now that we have so many kind of LLM recommendations flooding the marketplace, the question of where information comes from and what information to trust is a huge one, and one that we're hoping to be able to solve not just through our trusted ratings and reviews, which have been the backbone of what we provided to consumers for years, but also by making that information available in new ways so that it can permeate throughout the agentic marketplace and so that objective information can be part of every purchase that a consumer makes when they're participating in agentic commerce. I'll say too that these agentic patterns are of real interest to us. Some of the work that we've done in the past at Consumer Reports relates to serving as an agent, even in kind of the pre-AI boom. We worked on a product called Permission Slip, which is a data privacy app that served as an authorized agent and helped consumers exercise their right to privacy by talking to companies on their behalf. And through operating that
Well,
service for, yeah,
just one quick thing I have to note,
yeah.
because Ginny, you spoke a little fast. What Ginny just said is that Consumer Reports has already launched an authorized agent in the marketplace before generative AI even kind of blew through. And I know you're about to describe what it does with data rights protocols, but to me, it's really noteworthy that you're one of the only companies I know that already has an authorized, like a legal authorized agent service on behalf of consumers to go and conduct a type of transaction, a regulatory one, but a type of transaction with companies and other third parties on their behalf. So I just want to highlight that little bit that you just kind of threw in there, and please continue.
Yeah. Yeah, well, absolutely. And what we've learned through that, what we've learned through operating an agent is that actually the number one thing that makes the agent work is trust. The consumer has to trust it, and the counterparty, or in the case of permission slip, the company that we're serving the rights request to also needs to trust the agent. And so I think then it's a question of what is trust going to look like in this world of agentic commerce when I, a consumer, am giving my credit card to what feels like a bot to me to go off and make purchases on my behalf. How can I trust that that agent really understands my interests profoundly and can extend them and act on them so that it's all going to go the way I hope? And that's a really crucial question where we're hopeful that the trusted information that Consumer Reports provides, as well as kind of the trust that we have with businesses whose products we rate, can enable us to serve as that intermediary and activate some of these agentic transactions on behalf of our members. But that trust is really crucial, and I think there are even just questions of, is this agent acting on me? Is it trying to maximize profits by buying things that maybe I don't want or the most expensive version of the thing? Or is it acting for me? Is it really understanding what I need and going out there and scouring the market, doing all the research it needs to do to make that best call on my behalf? And so a lot of the research we're kicking off with Stanford, with Dell, the Digital Economy Lab, with Hi, the Human AI group, and of course the CodeX is about some of these technical and legal standards to be able to measure and evaluate the loyalty of an agent to the consumer it's acting on behalf of.
Profound. We've heard a lot about payments, and Consumer Reports, I know, has talked about conscious commerce. Conscious commerce. Can you unpack what that means? It's an evocative phrase, and it makes me think about, all kinds of things, from including like consciousness of AI and just being conscientious. What does it mean to you, and and how do you build this kind of higher level concept into an architecture for agentic commerce from the start?
Absolutely. Yeah. So When we say conscious commerce, what we mean is we would love to design an agentic commerce marketplace that works as a market that represents what people most care about. So, how do we make sure that the things consumers care about, whether it's I want to shop vegan or I want to make sure that the labor that went into this product is to my liking or that it was sustainable, like how do we make sure that those values consumers bring to any purchase they make are reflected in the agent's intent and the purchase that's ultimately made, and also that those values end up influencing what is available on the market, what manufacturers and companies prioritize when they're building products. There's already research showing that AI shopping agents are not making the choices you would expect. And there was a recent study from Columbia Business School where they set up a mock online store and they had the AI shopping agent go and pick things. And what they found is that things like the placement of the product on the page or whether the product had a sponsored label on it meaningfully influenced the choices that the agents were making. And it's scary to imagine that the marketplace is working that way, that AIs are making these kind of arbitrary calls when they're buying things on my behalf. There's also been study coming out of Microsoft Research about how sellers that respond faster, or some sellers that are even making fake claims, but that are kind of engineered in the way where the agent finds it attractive, that those sellers get more sales. And so, how do we make sure that these agents can navigate the information marketplace with a level of scrutiny and objectivity to be able to make the right decision on behalf of the consumer? Because that ability is also what's going to influence a market where product design choices are made in line with what people actually want and what's ultimately going to sell.
Indeed. It's funny, the observation, Craig's observation that agents don't have eyes. And so advertisements doesn't make sense. I mean, at least from where I'm sitting in San Francisco, I go to some of these meetups from some of these very interesting startups of people that have are refugees from the big labs, the big frontier model labs, and they're working on some stuff where you just inject a little bit of context along the way. What you might consider prompt injection, if it was an attack against you, but it could be even things that aren't human readable, but it represents the brand of certain, this is the Coca-Cola brand and how the model, once it goes through the agent, will then it'll be as though were talking about that product, and then when it's weighing what you might be interested in, there's subtle ways that we get to the same things advertising's supposed to do when it manipulates our subconscious to manipulating the high dimensional vector space subconscious of these agents. So we shall see how all this unfolds over time, I suppose. And I trust that your Consumer Reports will continue to be there to safeguard our interests as consumers as this all unfolds. Okay, it's fun time, everybody. Now we get to actually talk to each other. And so you can see I've got a bunch of cross-panel questions. I fear I may have been a little too liberal with timing, and so we don't have a lot of time left. And so what I want to invite you to do as panelists, if you'd like, is if you have any questions for one another or any topics that you would like us to address, and feel free to grab them from the prep sheet that I shared. But I already noticed that there's spontaneously, thanks to Kelsey, a little bit of cross-panelist talk, and I know many of you, and I can sort of read the room. I'll bet you do have some questions or ideas, so feel free to come off mute now and help us spark a better dialogue among each other.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ginny, I think spot on, and that's one of the main reasons why when we build two-layered sort of systems so far. One is building trust as a foundation between agent, consumer, issuer, and then ensuring that the trust can be communicated. And that's where the trusted agent protocol comes in. And I know we're partnering together as a collective industry and specifically with all of these panelists. But I think the idea is to communicate the trust from, let's say, consumer reports agents all the way to the merchant agent or a merchant themselves in terms of this is a trusted agent. This is why they're trusted. They've done all of these pre-steps for it to be trusted. It's fascinating that all of us, across boundaries, across ecosystem, everybody's just trying to solve for trust. And I think I can't think of any open loop ecosystem where the trust can be built without a network or a scheme defining the rules. And Dazza, I think we were talking about it before the session began. I think the rules will become very important. to drive and instill trust in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I love that point, Jalpesh, that, it's the protocol, it's the technical standard, but it's also the network. And how do we make sure that the rules of the network are articulated correctly and that the various players on the network are able to, interchange and communicate and otherwise enable these sales that can be trusted by consumers and by merchants and by all the network participants.
And hold people accountable. Like, I think rules do that function in making sure that through monitoring, through program, through performance, we go and say, like, this is where the faults lie, so that the rest of the ecosystem doesn't have to pay for somebody else's faults. So, and I think just balancing that over a period of time and creating a framework that can adapt, and that's the whole purpose of like building these tools and building the rules that go hand in hand.
Here, let me jump in a little bit on that point. It's so interesting with I think what Jalpesh was mentioning is I was basically gushing over the Visa operating regulations, which is like this 15-volume set of these like overarching operating rules that all the players agree to with their opt-in contracts, like the banks and the consumers and merchants and everyone. And it makes everything flow pretty smoothly across like every country on earth. And so we worry about jurisdictions, but it's a contract is fundamentally what this is. It's not like government regulations. It's just a multilateral contract. And we agree to the technical protocols, the liability, how to use the brand, basically everything. And it adapts, as there's new fraud and technologies evolve. Like, this is not the same contract from the 70s or the 80s or 10 years ago or 3 years ago. And it makes me just wonder what the opportunities are for some of these protocols to operate within rules that people agree to. So like maybe new multilateral contracts that merchants and sellers and the open AIs and the payment processors and consumer groups might agree to, and whether that would be an extension of credit cards or some other players. That's one thing. And then since we do have one Q&A, I'll throw a second thing out there and anyone bite it, whatever you want to, or something else. But the other question, speaking of the ecology that we're in, and everyone's roles and responsibilities within it, advertisers have been a major part of and a major funder of the ecology that gave rise to Web 2. And their bread and butter is being challenged now for the reasons Craig mentioned. Like, you can't really serve an old style ad to an agent. And we're disintermediating the user's eyeballs. And so, what are the implications of that for the business, the very business model, and where the chip's going to fall in the new system as we like merrily go forward and start leaning on agents, giving them Rails protocols where we're significantly disrupting the business models that already exist. And what is the next form of, like, is there going to be a grand re-disintermediation or whatever? Like, how is this going to look? Discuss.
I know we're almost at time. Maybe I'll give a quick comment on that, and as well as I think it's consistent with what Sophia on the Q&A is asking. So, like, again, like, we don't go and define how the chips fall. We go and enable the ecosystem so it's fair for everybody to play and innovate. And in this model, when agents go and shop at a bunch of places, go and scour, like look at reviews from a different places to buy from an entirely different place, that becomes a challenge for people who have collected a lot of effort in building a review system. That's their IP, so to speak. We believe that there is a model for them to monetize that IP away from advertisement when it comes to agents. Obviously, you talked about how this might evolve even further, influence the agents to buy a certain way. So we need to solve all of these problems. In a trusted agent protocol, there is one area where we address it very specifically, where we're enabling merchants or these review sites or content sites or blog sites to effectively put a paywall on top of their sites so that agents, they identify this as an agent and not a consumer. It's a trusted agent acting on behalf of a consumer. They can demand a small fee to access that content. And that fee could be passed on to the consumer or can be paid by the agent because agent's getting recurring revenue. That's really up to the agent and consumer to figure out. But we're enabling those sites to request revenue, request some small fee before they can access free content.
Got it. Yeah, and that is the shape of things. What exactly who will be requesting payments for what, I guess,
Yeah.
are the details to be worked out. I want to thank each of you so much for taking time out of your day and for being so generous with sharing your expertise and your time. And I learned a lot as well. And let's keep the conversation going among the panelists and all of you who joined us as viewers and engaged in a really robust debate I'm just seeing now in chat. And to continue this, join us at loyalagents.org, where you can learn more and you can sign up for future activities and stay involved. And so until next time, thanks again. I'm Dazza Greenwood on behalf of Stanford and Consumer Reports, who convened for this webinar. And we look forward to catching up with you, and we will send a link to this video. Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you all. Bye.